So hi, everyone, and welcome. It's nice to see so many people showing up today. Normally in a scientific presentation, there's this introduction in the beginning, but we're going to use the Storyforum science method today and self-introduce as we go along the process. And the first one to start off will be Holly. She's going to start this seminar, and then I will jump in halfway through and finish it up. So go ahead, Holly.
I'm going to share my screen. So today we'll be talking about, well, as you can see, science communication using something called Storyform. And just so you'll know, we'll be showing a template over and over and over and over. You don't have to have that template, of course, to follow along. But if you want that template afterwards, all you have to do is go to our website, storyformscience.com, go to the workshops page, and at the bottom, this template and all the other materials you see us using will be there for you to download for free. All right. So as scientists and as researchers, we're tasked with communicating our research to really broad, diverse audiences. We often think of communicating to our peers, but that's just a slice of the pie. Really, we have to be able to communicate to collaborators, to funders, policymakers, general public, and those are people outside of our institution. We also have to be able to talk to people inside of our group, like administrators or teams or students. We might have a whole variety of goals, but those goals pretty much fall into three categories. And they are provide information, promote understanding of what it is we're talking about, and ultimately to influence the behavior of our audience in a way that we want to influence their behavior. And those three things are actually related. I mean, you can't influence someone's behavior unless you get them to understand. You can't get them to understand unless you provide information. So how do scientists or researchers normally try to get those goals achieved in diverse audiences? Well, normally what we do is we think of our research in all of its complicated, voluminous glory. And then we decide that the best way to go about this is to get as much research, much of that information as we can into however many minutes we are given. And we have lots of tricks to do that. We can make PowerPoint slides and load information into bullet points. We can put graphs. We can use all sorts of tables. And we can also talk just about as fast as we possibly can and skip over slides in the end. Now, our hope is that this approach will make our audience at the end of our talk understand what we know. And let me just ask you, how successful is this approach at doing that, at getting the audience to pay attention and understand? And you can answer for yourself, but most people that we ask say the answer is not very. This approach doesn't usually meet our goals. Why? Well, to understand why, you really have to think about things from the audience's point of view as they're sitting in a typical research talk. They're getting bits of information, and all those bits of information they have to take in, and they have to take a look at them, and they have to see what they're about and then fit them in with what they already know, but also what the information that's sort of coming in a continuous stream. And, you know, an audience can do that for a while, and they kind of look at those pieces and they try to figure out what picture's emerging. This process that I've described, it's called learning. And it's a process that takes time and it takes effort. And a smart audience can do it, right? For at least a while. But at some point, things are coming so fast and furious that the audience feels overwhelmed. They kind of lose track of what's going on and they give up and they feel lost. And when that happens, they don't understand anymore. And if they stop paying attention, they won't understand anything from that point on. When that happens, when they stop paying attention, really the talk doesn't matter at all to them. As a matter of fact, the research doesn't matter at all to them. So what we really need in our communication, whether it's talks or whether it's visuals, is we need a method of creating talks that helps the audiences or helps audiences learn what we want to communicate to them for the goals, for our goals. And fortunately, Adam and I have a method that does just that. It's called Storyform Science. And what it does is that using the template that I introduced in the very beginning, it helps researchers focus on what they really want the audience to walk away with. And then it helps them to pick out pieces in their research that then they will arrange in a certain pattern in their talk. And this certain pattern will help the audience understand as they go and ultimately understand what it is that they're talking about. Now, what is this pattern? The pattern is the form of story. And why is the form of story something really worth noting? It's because we think in stories. Our default mode of thinking and learning is the pattern of story. Now, I'm Holly Walter Kirby, as you know, and I'm a chemist and a playwright and an educator, and I developed the Storyform Science method. I found this pattern and began to use it when I was the PI on 2 NSF grants. And I used it to teach chemistry concept in outreach settings. And then after that, I met Adam and we worked together teaching a science communication course at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And we honed this method so that it was more effective and more streamlined and also could be used not just for talks, but also for visuals. And then we have a bunch of courses and workshops, and we use that method to help our participants craft a variety of communication products, like 3-minute naked talks, not meaning what you have on, but meaning that you can't use any slides. Story graphics, which is Adam's title for the infographics that he has designed using story. Posters, and 10-minute talks with slides. We don't teach this in the workshops and courses, but I also teach a course with Joan Jorgensen. She's a professor of veterinary medicine, and we use Storyform to write manuscripts. Now, although Storyform is based on story, just like I said, I really have to have a disclaimer wedged in here, and that is that when we use story, the pattern of story, we don't do what groups do like the Moth or Story Collider or Radiolab. We don't teach people how to tell personal stories or anecdotes. Instead, we use our template, which has the pattern of story on it, to help people craft communication products that get their audience to pay attention and engage, process the information, learn, engage in that active process of learning, and understand scientific research. The little asterisk there is because it doesn't just have to be about research. It can really be about any scientific content. So in this seminar, what we're going to do is I'm going to introduce the method. Then I'm going to demonstrate how it's used to create talks. Then Adam is going to show how it's used to create visuals. And we're going to show lots of examples of what our participants have done with this method. So let me get started. Let me tell you a story. Actually, not a story per se, but let me talk about a genre of stories, and that is the murder mystery. So what happens in a murder mystery? Well, murder mysteries start out predictably with somebody who's dead. And to take a look at that death, someone is called in. That can be a private investigator, it can be a detective, it can be a old lady writer, a spinster writer, it can be a vicar. Lots of people solve mysteries at murder mysteries. And their goal will be, their problem is that they need to identify the murderer, the person that killed the person that opened up on in the beginning. And their approach to figuring out who the murderer is they're going to conduct an investigation. And investigations go really differently depending on what murder mystery you're watching or reading. But here are some typical things that could happen. Maybe a witness comes forth, or maybe a weapon is uncovered, or maybe they discover a motive. Whatever it is, in the end, all of these clues come together, and usually in a pretty exciting scene, the murderer is revealed. And sometimes, there's a chase scene there too. And then in the very end, we have closure because that murderer gets their comeuppance. They go to jail or whatever happens. Now, I don't know how into murder mysteries you are, but if you've ever read a good one or watched a good one, they're actually quite good at getting you to pay attention and engage, process information, learn what's going on, and understanding the big picture. How do they help you do that? How do they get you to do all those things? Well, Adam and I have looked through, and our story form science method basically uses 3 keys. Let me tell you what the keys are. First key, stories are journeys. And these journeys are revealed a little bit at a time in well-established steps. Now, what are the steps in a murder mystery? They're the steps in just about any simple story. They start out with introduction to the whole scene. Then something happens to create, or a problem is embraced. Then there's a series of episodes where somebody tries to solve that problem. And then there's a climax where the things come together and the problem's solved. And then in the very end, again, there's closure. You get a sense that things have been taken care of. How all of this has impacted you, the audience, and the people in the story. Now, we all know that journeys aren't just steps. It's not just like a bus route. Somebody has to go on a journey. So who goes on the journey of a story? The person who goes on the journey of the story is the main character. And typically in a murder mystery, it's the detective or the investigator. Not always, but typically. They're the person who goes through the entire arc of the story, solving things and taking actions and having things happen to them and being challenged. But they're not the only one to go on this journey. The audience, you and me, the people that are watching or reading this murder mystery, when it starts, what we do is we see that main character and we identify with them, that we step into their shoes. And once that happens, we go through the story with them. We see things from their point of view. We are challenged just like they are. We feel their successes. We feel them, and we are also solving their problem. And so they're not just the character in the story, they're also our guide. And that's why the second key is that stories aren't just journeys. They're journeys of mutual discovery, the main character and us, the audience. Now, why does the audience stay on the journey with the main character? Why don't they just, go a little bit and then bail? Well, the main reason we keep watching a story once we've begun is that we want to know what's going to happen next. And how does a story get us to do that? Well, this is the third key and probably the most important in research talks. And that is that stories are built around one main question. Questions have this amazing power over us. When we hear a question, there's a space that opens up in our brain. And because we don't know the answer, this is a space of uncertainty. And a certain tension is there because we don't know. This is called suspense in a story. And this suspense, this uncertainty, makes us want to learn the answer and makes us willing to work to learn the answer. Now, the whole first part of our murder mystery or any story sets up that question. And in a murder mystery, the question comes in right around here. And what's the question in a murder mystery? What's the main thing we're watching to find out? It's who done it? Who done it? The oddest contraction I've ever heard, but who done it? That's what they're called. And when is that question answered? Well, not right in the beginning, right? It's answered at the end. And so the audience has to wait all that time if they're going to get what they want. But they don't just sit on their hands and passively watch. What they do is, along with that protagonist, they process those clues and try to figure out the answer. They actually go beyond where the protagonist is. They try to predict what the answer, they try to predict who done it, which means a lot of learning, a lot of cognitive activity is happening there. This sort of structure, the setup, the question, the clues, the answer, the suspense and desire to learn, which makes all of these things happen, things we want for our talks. This is all embedded. Let me go back. That's embedded in those steps of the journey. And we have captured them in that story form template that I showed you in the very beginning. So if you want to create a research talk, let me just show you a little bit about that. And what we do, the first thing we do in our course is that we have people create a short talk. Then they can go on to creating longer talks. And again, it's not just about research. It can really be about any technical content. So the first thing that we have to do is we have to help people focus. What is it that they can't talk about everything. So what is it that they really want to talk about? And in order to know what they want to talk about, the first thing they have to do is decide who they're talking to, because whether they're successful or not depends on the impact on the audience. And we choose, when we're doing this 3-minute talk, we choose the audience for you. We say your audience needs to be anyone. And the reason we do this is because once you have made a talk for anyone, then it's very, very easy to modify that talk to make it for audiences with various levels of expertise. But if you make one for someone with a high level of expertise, it's very difficult to go and make one for, let's say, a collaborator that doesn't know much about your personal research. The next thing we do is we say, what research success, what recent research success do you want to talk about? And we have a little box where you would write that down. And then what challenge did you encounter when you achieved that success? And then who's the main character and guide in your story? Well, if this is about your research, then that question's easy. The main character and guide is you. You're the one who did the learning, so you'll be the guide in getting the audience to do that learning with you as the main character. And, we don't have time to really go through very much of this at all because we're going to talk about visuals as well. But I just want to give you maybe a minute and write these things down. I've already told you the audience, you already know the main character, but if you were going to do a talk, write down a recent success that you would want to talk about and what challenge you encountered. Go ahead. I'll give you 45 seconds. It'll help you pay attention. Okay, that's it. So hopefully you've got a research success that you want to talk about, and be thinking about that as I go through how we use story pattern to construct the rest of the talk. So, I used a puzzle earlier as a metaphor for research and learning, but there are, as with any metaphor, there are limitations. Your research, puzzles end, right? Puzzles have beginnings and ends. Your research, somebody worked on your stuff before, and you've got lots more to do that you want to do before you leave, and then somebody will continue to work on it. However, unlike research, which goes on and on, our talks need to end, right? And our talks need to end with an ending. Our talks should not end because we've run out of time. They should end with a strong ending. So if you take a look at that template that I have again, the end's right here. And notice that the end, this is right here where you're going to talk about the research success, your recent research success. Now, notice that there's actually two boxes in the ending. The first one is the last thing you did before the success that actually got that final success to happen. And then the last thing is the final results of your final action. And before, I wanted you to just write, but not anymore. Now, what I want you to do, or what we have our participants do in our course, is we don't have them write, we have them visualize the end. We have them visualize the end, that success that they want to talk about. And to visualize it, we have them use icons. We give them a grid. It's made of little rectangles. They cut them up. Then they fold them. And on the face of that rectangle, on that square, they make an icon to represent the parts of their success, the elements. Now, the question obviously is, why do we use icons? Well, there's a lot of reasons, but let me just give you 3 reasons. Number 1, it automatically reduces jargon, and jargon is the enemy of all science communication. If somebody doesn't know the word you're using or the term, then you've lost them right there. Icons keep you from using a jargon. Icons make your talk easy to revive. Often, most of us, when we have something written down, it's very hard to go back and revise it. We like it the way it is, but icons are very easy to move around. And so they make improvement by revision much more likely. And last but not least, Pictures are the best medium of communication. And what I mean by that is the best way to teach someone something, to get them to learn, is to get a picture in their head, to form some image in their head. And if you're going to do that, you need to have that image in your head. And the best way to get that image in your head is to build it with icons. So I want to give you an example, and this is a Dr. Xingyu Peng. There she is. I'll put her down there in the main character box. And her main thing that she wanted people to learn, the main thing that she wanted, the research success was that she wanted people to know, I used a computer program to identify molecules that could store solar energy. And then she thought about the end. And she broke it into two parts. And in the very first part, she had a computer. She had written a computer program, and she had a myriad, thousands of molecules to sort through, molecules that were potential candidates for storing solar energy, but she didn't know which one was the one. And then after she took her final action, her final results were that she was able to sort through all of those and identify a handful of molecules that could store solar energy. And what's more, they were cheaper and lighter than batteries, which was obviously the other contender for storing energy. Now, that was how she used icons to build her final answer, her final action, final results. That right there is the answer. Remember the question I talked about, that the question is like there's a question, everything's built around a question. Well, that's the answer right there. So the next step she would do is to write the question. And the question needs to be concrete and simple. It needs to be things like, can I do this? What will I see? Is my hypothesis confirmed? Which of these options is true? Simple, concrete, specific. And so hers was, can we find a way to store solar energy that's cheaper than batteries? And you can see, if you look down at her answer, the action, the scene that she's built in the end answers that question. Now, the whole first part of the story, right, is going to set up that question. And so first of all, we have the step of the current world, which is why, when you say why it was important to do your work. Then you have the problem and how you're going to address the problem. And then you have where you're going to tell how you answered that question bit by bit until you get to that final answer. And then in the better world, that's the part where we're going to close things out. And that's where we talk about the impact of your work, why the world is a better place, and also what needs to be done in the future. And of course, all of these steps that I've just described, the current world problem, addressing the problem, the steps in the better world, none of those are done by writing down. All of those are done by creating icons. So in the end, you end up with a template full of little icons standing up. Delivery is done by basically going, whoops, I missed that. Delivery is done by going in a clockwise circle around the template on the colored squares. And you already know that you can see people then building their stories with icons. You already know people do that, but they also, in the first versions of giving their story to somebody, giving their research talk, they also use these icons. So they pick things up and they talk about them as they go through. Then what they do was, once they've done with their 3-minute talk, that's what I'm talking about right now, they give it to their people in the workshop, and they get feedback. And they don't just get feedback like, oh, that was good or that was bad. They get specific feedback based on the rubric we'll give people that will help them give specific constructive comments to help them improve their talk. And then after that, getting that feedback, they do revisions. Feedback part is absolutely essential because the whole idea, right, is to get people to understand your talk, and you don't know if they do unless you tell them the talk and you ask them. Then once they've revised once again, we have people give their talks as many times and to as many audiences as possible. So before the pandemic, when we were doing in-person talks, we would have people do 3-minute thesis talks, to talk in informal settings, to talk in more formal settings. We had them do talks in coffee shops and in corn mazes. And in every case, when people would do these talks, we'd have the public come and they would fill out little pieces of paper to give feedback to the researcher, to let them know, what they thought about their talk. And then once again, it got revised. So this feedback loop, this delivery feedback revision loop would go over and over again. Now, I want to give you an example of a talk that has gone through several iterations of feedback and revision. And that's going to be Xingyu's talk, the person I was using as an example. This is her 3-minute thesis talk that she gave at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, 3-minute thesis competition. And what you'll see is, you see the template, you'll hear her voice, but then you'll see the little icons come up to show you how she created her talk and then how she delivers it bit by bit.
Morning, everyone. My name is Xingyue Peng. I'm a 5th-year PhD student in chemical engineering. Today, I'm going to talk about storing solar energy with chemistry. People in the world need energy, and all the energy we need in a year is delivered to the Earth by the sun in 1 hour. So take a guess, what % of our electricity today is generated from solar energy? 40, 20, 10? The answer is none of the above. It's only 1%. Why we don't take advantage of this abundant renewable resource? Because there are many challenges of using solar. First, the sun only shines during the day, so we need to store a lot of energy for the night. Second, the sun shines more at deserts than cities like Madison, so we need to store and transport the energy from one place to another. Well, you may say, we can use batteries, but they are too expensive and heavy to transport. So our question is, can we find a new way to store energy that is cheaper and lighter? As a chemical engineer, I'm working on storing solar energy in chemical bonds. We are looking for a special type of molecules. When they are exposed to sunlight, their chemical bonds are broken by absorbing energy from the sun. We can then store and transport these separate parts. When we need energy, we just let the parts go back together. When the chemical bonds are reformed, the energy is released. This reversible process can happen over and over again. Sounds great, right? But here is the complication. There are millions of chemicals that are possible to use for storage. How can we know which one is the best? So we can use computer to help us. During my PhD, I developed a computational program to screen out the best candidates from a large chemical database. For any given chemical, our tool can tell us whether this bond breaking is reversible, how strong the bond is, and most importantly, what's the storage cost. Using this screening tool, we have successfully discovered several promising chemicals that can store 5 times more energy than the same weight battery and at a lower price. Imagine one day in the future, all gas stations are replaced by solar stations. Instead of gas, our cars are now run on these special chemicals that harvest solar energy and do not emit CO2. On that day, we are living in a truly sustainable world. Thank you.
All right. I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Adam.
And I will start sharing. So I want to hit. So let's look at using that story form, same story form template, storyboard to visually communicate science. And what I really want you to talk to you about is, excuse me, a story graphic, but people don't know what that is. So I'll start with an infographic instead. And so if I show you some infographics that I pulled off the web, they're beautiful, they're visual, they're information heavy, they're graphic heavy, which is why you call them infographics, but they do not contain stories. And what we do in the course is we have you do visuals like this, but with a story in them. And so here's one by Lonnie Van Bank, who took the course last summer. And you can see she's talking about fat molecules or lipids and how they turn into acylcarnitines, and that gives you energy for the cell. But then there's a problem, right? So she's pulling pieces right off of that template. There's the current world. Here's the problem she's going to go after. Here's hers, the main character, as Holly talked about. And then next comes a question that she's going to ask, right? How do these acylcarnitines get from the blood into the cells? There must be a transport protein. So that's what she's going to look for when she addresses the problem, and then the steps that she's going to take to get there. And when she finds that result, how that makes the world better. Again, straight off that template. Here's a story graphic by Praveen, who also took the story form course last summer. And then here's Sing Use, which I will break apart for you and show you how she did that one. Ali just showed you Sing Use icons come up on the storyboard template. What you have to do to go from giving a talk into making visuals for a talk is you have to break this thing apart into pieces and put it onto a different template. And we have a specific template just for visuals. It has this exact same setup. So let me move her icons over from that other template to this template. And you can see they all fit in there. There's one more thing at the top up here. The one main thing at the top is we have you fill that part out when you're doing visuals, and that ends up becoming your title. And so then we show you how to go from a first draft, right, and into making an actual story graphic. And we have you do the same revision, delivery, and feedback that Holly was talking about with a different rubric, of course, because you're doing visuals. Right, and then we take you through a process of how you actually take this rough template, this first draft, and actually add visualizations to it using Google image searches or using BioRender. So originally I showed you the thing on the right was what Sing Yu came up with. In reality, she came up with this on the left in her first draft. And there's a big difference between these two because the thing on the left actually had her create this visual, this story graphic for the first time, which then again, she had to do that revision and feedback and revise. And when she did that, people didn't understand why she was showing this complex thing in the middle or why she was showing Alaska. They didn't understand some of her jargon. And so she had to go through this a few times before she could get to the one that's shown on the right here, which was her final one. Once she got there, we can then start putting that to work, right? And so you can use these kind of story graphics. Imagine all of those audiences that Holly was introducing earlier coming up to your poster or being able to come communicate with you and completely understanding what you're doing in the research lab. And then, of course, if you want to go to audience members like peers who want more detail, you have all that other information on your poster available. Often people who take our course are just beginning their research, right? They don't have all that hard data. And so what do they do if they don't have any of that data? What we do is we take them down a path where they imagine what that data is going to look like when they get it in the research lab. And so here's one by Odalis. Odalis took everything that she learned in her lab and put it up here in her story graphic. And then this part right here is where she's going to start her research as a first-year grad student and move forward from. Now notice, as a first year with no data, you would not be able to give a poster at a presentation at a symposium. But by using this story graphic, Odalis was able to actually print this and actually use this at a seminar. Going through the course and learning how to use the story form template, you can actually apply all of that information straight to a poster. And so here's one by Alex who took our course. And you can see there's the main character, there's the problem. here's his approach to the problem, here's the steps that he's taking, and then the better world, the final result in the better world. But what we really want you to do is go even further than that, not just use this template to do your posters, but actually take it to the next level where you're actually making an entire poster as a story graphic, right? That way anyone can come up and understand your research no matter what audience they're in. And you can see there's Alex, the main character, there's the problem, right? What he's doing to address the problem. There's his question right on his poster now, and then the steps that he's taken and the final results. So imagine the first year like Odalis or an advanced researcher like Alex creating these posters and making them understandable to any audience member, not just peers, but any audience member, especially when they come home, right? And they end up in that hallway outside of the research lab. Imagine these kind of posters hanging out there where anyone could walk down that hallway and understand exactly what's happening in those research labs. Let's talk quickly about making images for your slides, like in a 10-minute presentation or a 50-minute presentation. Often what people will do in research is they will show you things like this, right? Here's a typical slide from a typical talk at a research talk. And when you show people stuff like this, the audience members do not know where to look or how to unpackage this, those puzzle pieces that Holly was talking about earlier. They don't get it. And so what I like to say is if it's mandatory that you're using a laser pointer, that's not the right way to do this. Storytelling is what you should be using. And so let's take this very slide and just rearrange it into a story, right? So in step 2 of this process I'm working at, I need to validate my research by RNA-seq. That's going to allow me to figure out the QTLs, right? And by doing this thing, I'm going to have to take the information I had from step 1, and then I'm going to go to this next step where I'm going to inject them into an embryo, 2-cell embryo from a xenopus frog. That's going to allow me to look at things in a different way with allele A and allele G. That's going to give me a half mutant tadpole. I can then take those two mutated, the mutated and the unmutated, sorry, halves, and then I can actually do my research on them. I can do that single cell RNA-seq on them and get those isoforms out. I can also look at patch clamp, and I can see what's coming out in the neurotransmission levels, right? So here's all those parts. There's the question I'm looking at. There's what I'm doing to address the problem. There's my first step, my second step, my third step, and then my final results will come from there, straight off that story form template, right? Again, so that here's that original slide in the upper left, here's that slide in the bottom right, using a story. The last thing I want to talk to you about is this story graphic versus infographic. We're all very familiar with doing graphs and charts and histograms. It's perfectly what we need to do when we're collecting data in order to figure out what story we want to tell. But again, these visuals like this graph is actually an infographic. It does not have that story built into it. And so what we need to do is take the story that's implied from the data, right? We've gotten that data, we've figured out what it meant to us, and we build this story off of that. Now what we need to do is combine those two together. And we do that using a story graphic, right? Using that storyboard template, creating a story graphic. So if I take and merge those two together and I show you this visualization, this story graphic, and then I say, hey, here's the story. I wanted to look at a comparison between two drugs. One of those drugs is taken twice a day and it never reaches an effective dose. The other drug is taken right before bedtime. It's time released during the night, and it gives you an effective dose throughout most of the day. Notice I didn't have to point at anything on the screen. I didn't have to use a laser pointer in any way. I could actually tell my story while you in the audience, anyone in the audience at any level could figure out exactly what I was talking about. All of that's done by using that story form template. So to wrap up, we talked about all these different tools that we have. Holly mentioned they're available at storyformscience.com for free. We don't charge you anything. You're welcome to go get them, download them, and start using them today. But what we're going to do is teach a 6-week course this summer where we'll teach you how to do 3-minute talks and story graphics and visuals and 10-minute talks. And you can see that's on our website there. It's right there. I've highlighted it in a red box. And what Chris is going to do from Mary is send out a notification to all members, because Mary is going to sponsor at least 6 of the slots, or approximately 6 of the slots in that summer course. So if any of you are listening and want to apply for free, right, and get this information and get this learning for no cost, Mary will cover that cost for you if you apply and tell Mary why you want to take this course. So with that, I will end, and we'll take any questions that you have. Holly and I will take.
Thank you very much. That was an excellent presentation. And again, this session today was sponsored by the McPherson Eye Research Institute. And as Adam said, the McPherson Eye Research Institute will be sponsoring at least 6 trainees, McPherson ERI trainees, to take this course. So if you're interested, or you are a PI who has students, I will be sending out an email shortly, and you can go ahead and respond to that, and we can move forward with the great course this summer. Any questions?
If you have any questions, just go ahead and just say them. You don't have to raise your hand or anything like that.
Adam, can you put the link to Storyform Science in the chat?
Yes, I will do that right now.
There's a question right here that says, loved your use of graphics, where to get them for free. When you're using, just to be clear, when you're using a graphics to start with in a sort of to develop things, you don't want to use graphics you got. You want to make icons yourself. That's really important to the process, to physically make them. But once you want to convert those handmade icons into something in a visual, then I mean, most of the things that I've gotten have been from the Noun project, which aren't for free, but they're pretty cheap. Adam, you get your stuff. Well,
Right. So yeah. So in the course, we show you how to use Google image searching to find icons that are perfect for what you want to make. And then we also use BioRender. We show you how to use BioRender, and we get you using that. Those are 2 great sources for making visuals. But again, like Holly said, you have to do the story first. You can't just make a visual without that story. It's critical. Well, we've used the whole hour, Chris, so I think we should stop it there and go from there. So
Thank you for attending, everyone.
yeah, thank you, everyone. Bye.